Well, let's go live to Canberra now for our regular Pollies panel. Gillian Bradford's joined by the Liberal Senator Mathias Cormann and Labor's Brodtmann.
Thanks, Richard, and thank you both for joining us. Brodtmann, I'll start with you. Last week, the Prime Minister was calling this youth allowance bill irresponsible and saying she'd do everything she could to block it. What's happened in that week?
Look, in the last week, nothing has really changed. In the fact that what happened by introducing it into this an appropriation type bill into the Senate, we've found that that's unconstitutional. So our position is still the same, and we've just got advice too that's in breach of a range of sections of the Constitution, Section 53 and others.
Might be in breach of the Constitution, but this morning the Minister said the distinctions, this is between regional and city students, weren't necessarily based on good science. And yes, we want to try to make sure that we meet our objective. We want to get more people to go to university, and yes, it could end up costing us $3 million. So are you going to...
Look, Labor is deeply committed to improving access to education for all, for particularly disadvantaged and regional and rural students. When the Coalition was in power, the regional participation decreased over 5 years. We're trying to fix that problem. In the last, since we introduced the scheme, we've got 85,000 students who are now signed up to the scheme. We've got a third of those are kids from regional and rural backgrounds. We've got students who are now involved in a scholarship scheme for accommodation, and about half of those are kids from rural and regional backgrounds.
But can I just clarify, are you going to pay up for these inter-regional students?
Well, the issue is that the thing is that if there are any changes, it has to be offset by savings. I mean, we want a budget surplus in 2012-13, and whatever happens in terms of budget changes, they have to be offset by savings.
I think that's a yes.
Well, I mean, the Coalition has been fighting very hard for all country kids to get a fair deal. When Labor made changes to the youth allowance arrangements, they stuffed up. And the Minister's comments today...
You agreed to them, though?
Well, we didn't agree to them. We said that there's a lot of kids that are going to be worse off as a result of this in country areas, and we took a policy to the last election to fix that. And of course, at the moment, what we've been doing in the Parliament is to try and fix, as we promised before the election, the problem that Labor created. Now, it's time for the government to stop playing semantics on all of this. The Labor Senator from Queensland, President of the Senate, John Hogg, has made very clear that the legislation introduced into the Senate by the Coalition is constitutional. And quite frankly, we should stop having this fight about semantics and process. If the government supports the very good initiative that we've put forward to deliver a fairer deal for all country kids, they should get on board and support our bill.
And as Mr Pyne suggested today, if you think the bill's unconstitutional, that's because the opposition's putting in this supposed money bill in the Senate. Will you make it your own bill just to get the changes through? Will you adopt it as your own?
The thing is that our current position is that it's unconstitutional under the current arrangements.
And
the Labor is again all over the place. I mean, the Minister this morning seemed to suggest that they were now supporting what was very sensible policy, which incidentally is fully funded. It is completely revenue neutral in terms of the budget bottom line.
How is it revenue neutral?
Because it will be funded from uncommitted funds out of the education fund. The government is well aware of this, and you'll find when it's all said and done, this will be one of a whole series of Julia Gillard backflips, like the one on the GST health reform, which was going to be non-negotiable, we're not going to have a carbon price before the election, then we're going to have a carbon price after the election. This government is directionless, it's all over the place, and this is just another demonstration of this.
Brodtmann, can I just clarify with you? I note some of your colleagues in regional areas like Shane Newman from Blair, which takes in most of Ipswich, he said this morning that this was a good result. Would you concede that this is a good result to get more regional students into university?
Well, the Coalition agreed to it late last year, and in terms of, we are delivering good results for kids in rural and regional areas and students under 25 in regional and rural areas already. And we'll do this review, we'll bring it forward, we'll reassess the eligibility for inner and regional areas, but we are already delivering great results.
Now, Mathias Cormann, the Prime Minister told Parliament today that ugly politics is before us again, that members of the opposition are embracing one-nation-styled attacks on Muslim immigration. Do you agree with your colleague Corey Bernardi that Islam is a problem?
Well, I just remind Julia Gillard that before the election, when she was worried about losing seats like Lindsay and the like, she was very happy to go into Lindsay and tell people in Lindsay that they were quite entitled to be concerned about the failure of the Labour government to protect our borders. She talked about Kevin Rudd having lost his way and that somehow she was going to do what was required to protect our borders properly. And here we are. Since the election, we had more than 50 illegal boat arrivals, and people across Australia are concerned about this. It is time that Julia Gillard stopped running for distractions and started actually to address the problems.
Do you think there are problems with Muslim integration in Australia?
Well, we've got a very serious problem of illegal immigration. We've had more than 50 illegal boat arrivals since Julia Gillard was re-elected.
Notwithstanding illegal immigration, but just Muslim immigration generally.
Well, I mean, I think that very clearly integration of all migrants is very, very important, and I think that Australia has got a long history of success in integrating people from many backgrounds, including people from Belgium that might have come here a few years ago. But the point here, though, is that Julia Gillard, before the election, was quite happy to say to people, you're quite entitled to be concerned about the failures of our government to properly protect our borders and to have people arrive willy-nilly on more than 200 illegal boat arrivals since Labour changed the tough border protection measures that have been put in place by the Howard government. And of course now she's having this sanctimonious high moral ground line of argument again and wagging her finger like a school teacher. The reality is like she changes her rhetoric according to her needs.
Look, linking this border protection to base politics, what has happened over the last 2 weeks has been base politics at its most base.
And Julia Gillard went in for base politics in the lead up to the last election in order to protect the seat of Lindsay.
Senator Bernardi comments and then the issue with the funeral last week, you are just trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator. It is absolutely appalling. It's base politics. It's politics at its most rank
You
level.
don't seem to be supporting your colleagues who have raised issues with Muslim integration, with the failure of multiculturalism per se. What is your view on that?
I strongly support all my colleagues, and there are legitimate issues that are, quite properly the subject of public policy debate around what measures to ensure proper integration of migrants from all backgrounds. But the issue that is at the heart of all of this is that we've got more than 200 illegal boat arrivals, that we've got more than 10,000 illegal immigrants arriving on our northern shores, that this government promised that they would do something about it before the election, that this Prime Minister went into seats like Lindsay when she thought she needed to say what people wanted to hear to win the seat, and she was quite happy to say that you're entitled to be concerned about this lack of control that we've sort of,
What do you think are the limits of the debate that we should and could be having on this? Do you think it is reasonable, Gai Brodtmann, to be having a debate on Muslim integration, on multiculturalism, or is that not reasonable?
I think it's more than reasonable. I think we have a very, very long history of multiculturalism in this country. My family alone, my family I'm part Chinese, I'm part German, and the Chinese and the Germans came out here in 1850. So the majority, the mass migration we've had here has essentially been since the 1950s, and that's when we sort of really had that integration, that multicultural push. But I do think it's worthwhile having the debate. But the thing is, it needs to be a healthy debate, a constructive debate, rather than getting to this lowest common denominator and the most base level. It needs to be a sophisticated debate and to address the issue of the needs of the nation for the future, and acknowledging the fact that people who come from various parts of countries throughout the world bring an enormous amount. They bring skills to the nation, they bring diversity to the nation, they enhance the nation in a number of ways, and I think that people need to consider that when they're having this conversation.
So if it is to be sophisticated, is it right for the Prime Minister to be invoking one nation when I think that's part of what provided oxygen to one nation in the first place, the fact that more than 1 million Australians felt they couldn't speak about this issue, so they gravitated towards one nation. Is that a problem if you start telling Australians that it's one nation to express concerns about integration?
I think the issue here is the fact that the coalition should not be invoking base politics on this issue.
The person invoking base politics is Julia
drawing
Gillard,
the race card as soon as you start getting boxed into a corner about a whole range of issues.
Julia Gillard is very un-prime ministerial on what is a very important issue. If Julia Gillard was serious about providing leadership, she would provide true leadership rather than to go for the political hatchet job. And quite frankly, she hasn't got much much credibility on that either, because when it suited her purposes before an election, she was quite happy to tell people what she knew they wanted to hear.
It didn't originate with Julia Gillard. It did originate in your shadow cabinet. I mean, what is going on there? You have leaks. You have people doing this for their own purpose.
Well, I mean, I think that my very good friend and colleague Scott Morrison pointed out that the gossip that was reported didn't reflect his views. So I'm not going to get into a discussion about hearsay that is not based on any fact.
He certainly hasn't denied that he raised as a strategy, though, at that meeting to bring up the issue of Muslim immigration to appeal to a broad section of Australia.
There's no doubt that there is a level of concern in the community about the level of illegal immigration, and there's a level of concern about the lack of integration in certain sections of our community that needs to be addressed. That's a legitimate debate, and that's one that we will continue to pursue.
A quick question for you, Gay, on the internal Labor review. The former Prime Minister today called on Labor to release the full election review, said he didn't have a problem with the bits about his leadership in it, so should they just release the whole review?
Oh, look, I'm happy with the review that we've got now. I read it on the weekend, and I really welcome the review. We're a progressive party, and I think it's good to let the sun shine in terms of actually assessing what we do and what's working and what's not. But I think that, and there's a number of elements I really support in the review. One of them being the need for an increased rank and file participation, also more community engagement, and also greater engagement with young people, particularly through the online environment. As a number of people know, my pre-selection was through the rank and file system that we have here in the ACT. It's an incredibly rigorous process, and that empowered everyone in the party and also energised everyone in the party. So I'm living proof of the fact that it is good. Rank and file, greater rank and file participation is good for the party.
Would you agree with the former Prime Minister that this fundamental reform in the Labor Party should take into account elimination of the power of factional leaders and factions in general?
Look, I think the factions are always going to be part of the party. I mean, there's factions. There's factions in any organisation where there's more than one person. So I think that that's just the reality of the party. But I do think that there's many positives that have come, recommendations that have come through the review, and I look forward to talking to party members about it.
Gay Brodtmann, Mathias Cormann, we're out of time. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Okay, Gillian Bradford there in Canberra with the Pollies panel. A bid by the Russian President